Hi, good morning everyone. I'm really sorry I can't be in Nairobi today with you, but many thanks for the opportunity to record a few words to throw into your debates, and I wish you all well. I have been told on occasion that I'm a cynic about resilience, which shocks me, and I heard the other day that I was regarded as being anti-measurement. So I've decided today to be very unprovocative and to call this little presentation, "You Can't Measure Resilience Because Resilience Doesn't Exist." Okay, where does that come from? Well, I think that uniquely in the aid world of all sectors, in resilience, we've got a confusion of two very, very different approaches that we're trying to do with the word. On the one hand, we say resilience is really important. It's one of the most important things that we can be investing in. And that to me is a political statement. It's not a technical statement at all. And the reason why we can make such a political statement is precisely because we know what the word means. Yeah, of course, the word is a bit woolly, it's messy, we don't quite know what the definition is. There's lots of internal contradictions kind of hiding in there. In other words, it's just like every other word in normal everyday language, and that's fine. There's also an idea that we actually don't quite know enough about how people cope, and we certainly don't know enough about what's going to be important for how people will cope in the future. Now, that's not obviously a political statement, that's a technical statement. But the two are very, very different ideas. In any other sector, we don't say, I don't quite know what malnutrition means because I haven't fully understood all the possible causes of malnutrition in the future of different population groups. Of course not. We don't say, I can't do anything about malnutrition until I know. Of course not. We certainly don't say, I can't measure my progress towards combating malnutrition because there's lots of causal pathways and potential correlations that I haven't quite understood what the determinants are. Of course not. What we do is we know what we want to do, we get on and we do it. Meanwhile, we're hoping that lots of experts, analysts, nutritionists, doctors, whatever, are all very busy uncovering new ideas, new pathways, new causes, new ways of combating malnutrition. We don't confuse those two. For some reason we do with resilience. That's particularly clear, I think, when we come on to resilience measurement and we get this kind of paralysis of what do I do? I don't know what to measure, and we get some very, very complicated models for measuring, so pretty much no one in the practitioner sphere can understand. Now, resilience is really, really important, and therefore we say, well, yeah, that's true. And we have to find ways of measuring things which are important. I think most of us would agree with that. And then, of course, it does seem to follow that therefore we have to be able to measure resilience. At this point I go, no, I'm not too sure about that. And then we have another statement which kind of seems to follow from that, which is, so resilience must be measurable because I need to measure it. And now we want to hold up our hands and go, no way, we don't have to follow you down that road. So why do I say that resilience doesn't exist? And actually that's the reason why we can't measure it. Well, quite simply, resilience isn't really much of a noun at all. I mean, it's much better adjective, resilient. That's really where the interest lies. Resilience, and the whole resilience discussion, is a way of looking at problems. When we start talking about building resilience, and that's what's important, we're not referring to some kind of entity that kind of inheres in people or kind of hovers around them in the same way we might say we want to build their bank accounts or build their assets or build their skills. Now we know what it means. We're not talking about that at all. When we say I need to build people's resilience, what I mean is I need to be investing in the vulnerable. More than that, I need to be combating vulnerability. I need to be not just thinking about how to optimize things in the good times. I need to be addressing risk. I need to be addressing crisis. And then other people would add to that, quite rightly, they would say, and it also means you need to be thinking future. It means you need to be preparing for a world that you can never entirely predict. That's what's important. Now, what that suggests is, to me, is that actually not only is there no such thing as resilience, but then there must therefore be no such thing as resilience programming. Now, that ought to be absolutely obvious. That doesn't mean that there's nothing that we can do to support people to be able to cope better. That there's nothing that we can do to help people combat future risks. Of course it doesn't. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing. What it does mean is that there isn't some kind of class of interventions which are resilience building interventions, which is somehow different from development. We've got humanitarian, we've got this, we've got that, and we've got resilience building. Not at all. What we have is resilience analysis. If I analyze why are people vulnerable, what are their vulnerabilities, what are the processes that keep them that way, what are the constraints, how might they be made more resilient, then anything I do which is towards that objective could be called a resilience building activity. And needless to say, no two sets of activities in different places, working with different people, need to have anything at all in common. Now, that of course ought to be quite important when we think about measuring resilience. Excuse me. If we think about how do I measure my progress, how do I measure my work in general in the development sphere, then I think we do know pretty well how to do it. Now, we don't always do it very well. We're actually very bad at investing the resources which are needed in doing it, and I'm a huge advocate of doing an awful lot more of it. But we kind of know what to do. We first of all start with a situation analysis. We have to understand what the problems are and what causes them. We've got to decide what change is needed, what changes are needed, usually in the plural. We've got to develop some kind of a model. People call it a theory of change or a program theory. You can call it with whatever jargon you prefer, but that just means if I throw some kind of intervention into the mix, I've got to have some kind of idea about how that mix works and how it then deals with interventions which I throw into it, and how do these things play out into the kind of the final outcome of changing the lives of the people that I'm interested in. And when I've kind of think I've worked that one out, all I need to do then is work out a set of indicators for each of the different, if you like, changes in that chain, which will tell me whether or not what I'm doing is really playing out the way I thought it would play out. And then off you go and monitor them. Well, go and monitor them with one eye, and with the other eye keep your eye on the broader context and things which are changing in the larger world outside. Easy? No. Very, very difficult to do well, but simple. And that's of course the difference between something being easy and something being simple. It's not complicated, it's just hard. What I say is, well, if that's how you monitor impact and if that's how you go about assessing change, well, why on earth would resilience and resilience programming, if you want to call it that, be any different? Just do exactly the same thing and approach it in the same way. Let me give a couple of examples. Two different population groups, same place, northern Uganda, a place I happen to know reasonably well. Okay, let's take widows. Now, how do you build their resilience? Well, let's turn it around. What's their key vulnerability? Well, one of them, not the only one of them is very, very precarious land rights, which has two main problems. One is it makes them prone to destitution and to social exclusion when they are widows. It actually has an impact far earlier than that, when they're still married, because they lose agency, if you like. They're not independent because they constantly have an eye to how will my in-laws treat me if my husband dies, and how do I constantly stay in their good books and do everything that they say to keep them sweet so that they won't entirely throw me off my land if my husband ever dies. And that keeps them in a state of almost perpetual semi-slavery for the whole of their married lives. Potentially, not all of them, of course. Okay, so what causes that? Well, we know pretty well what causes that. I mean, there's a failure of the traditional land justice system, and there's a failure of the local state court system to protect women's land rights. Fine. The solution is, well, there are various things which need doing. One is reforming the land administration so that people kind of know what land rights they've got and everybody knows it's all very clear. Holding traditional land authorities to account, because they do have legal powers and therefore they should be held accountable on how they use them, and we need to reform some of the processes of local justice. Let's just take that as read and not argue about it for the moment. Okay, so what in that case would I want to be monitoring? Well, there's quite a lot of different things that I would want to monitor. I would want to be looking at the judgment of local courts and seeing if they change as a result of any intervention I do and how we can get them better. But actually, just as important, even more important, is not the actual decisions themselves, but whether or not they ever get implemented, because we know that that's the key stage where things have been breaking down in the past. So we'd want to be looking at implementation of judgments. We'd want to be looking perhaps at changes in what people do when they are threatened with land grabbing. Do they start turning, are they more proactive? Do they turn to different people? And that will give me an idea of how changes are working out. What I might want to do is just monitor whether there is a change in whether or not people perceive that there is a threat, either to themselves directly or in the future. That's something which can be quantified quite easily. Um, we might want to look in the longer term at the prevalence of land grabbing. It's going to take a while, obviously, for that change to be noted, and it's going to be very difficult to measure for lots of different reasons, but we would want to. And in time, and this really would take years, we would want to be looking at the economic status of widows. Has that actually improved? And and has their social status at all changed as a result of what I was doing? But I think the important thing is that I would need to be measuring all of those things. If all I was trying to monitor was the change in economic situation of widows at the end, then I'm not really going to learn very much about land rights, about my work to try and improve women's land rights. That's not really where it's going to show up at all. Now, one interesting thing is that pretty much everything that I suggested might be a potential indicator to be monitored. You could probably fit somewhere on a resilience framework, on many of the resilience frameworks which have been developed. But I think the important thing to note is that none of them were taken from the framework. The framework wasn't the source of the idea. I didn't turn to a resilience framework to know what to monitor. I looked at the problem, I looked at the situation, I looked at my theory of change. That told me what to monitor. Let's take another example, perhaps. Same place, different population group. Let's look at youth. Young, that means young adults, of course. In urban areas, let's say, what are their problems? Well, one of them is economic uncertainty. They have low paid, highly exploitative work. A lot of them lack the skills, and more importantly, they lack the connections to be able to get some real jobs, as opposed to sort of these temporary fake jobs which don't really pay anything where they're exploited. There's a lot of impunity of employers, particularly around sexual exploitation of female staff, and there's pretty much no labour rights. Okay. Lots and lots of things which could be done to help, maybe better implementation of labour law. We want a change in attitude of the victims and of the police to things like sexual exploitation and to exploitation generally around wages, for it to be seen as a crime rather than, oh dear, you got done by someone. We'd want a much more tailored skills programme, which is not just helping people to learn to sew, but actually helping them to get good jobs. Perhaps that might include a lot more information about labour opportunities and where they are and how to get them. Okay, let's put all that in the mix. What kind of things would I be wanting to monitor? Well, I might want to monitor, for example, how long young people stay in a particular work opportunity which they have. That would show me its certainty, whether they were satisfied with it, and so on. I might want to look at how quickly they find work when they start looking and don't have. I might want to look at the percentage of workers who report particular kinds of abuse. I might want to look at income over a year. I wouldn't want to look at the income per week, because that's open to all kinds of interpretation, whether they have a job, whether they really get it, and so on. So I want to look over a whole year. I would actually want to be looking at how much they are investing in their future, in which kind of ways, because that would tell me not only their economic potential to invest, but also how secure they feel in the kind of jobs that they've got in looking at their future. So again, absolutely everything in there, I'm sure you can find. You could fit on a livelihoods framework. You could fit it all on a resilience framework, no problem at all. But you don't use the framework to know what it is that you need to monitor. And I don't think there was any indicator at all that was common to those two particular situations, even though they were in the same place in my particular examples. Why would they be? You're dealing with different people, therefore different problems, different vulnerabilities, different opportunities. The kinds of things you're doing to make their lives better are very, very different. Why on earth would we expect there to be anything at all in common in what we need to monitor? Why would we think that there are standard generic components which together create resilience? No, there are things which help people cope better with life. Those things are different in different circumstances, and that's what we need to measure at any one time. Now, that doesn't mean, please, that let's be very clear, I'm not arguing against long-term longitudinal research which is crunching lots and lots of numbers to try and see which parameters correlate with what, which seem to correlate with stability in whether in income over time, or in assets over time, investment over time, in well-being over time. Lots and lots of insights should come up from different places, from different ways of doing that kind of work. What I am arguing is that's not measuring resilience. That's measuring lots and lots of different things to try and learn more about how people cope. And it's certainly not impact assessment either, and it's got nothing at all to do with impact assessment. That is work which is designed to inform our understanding, to give us more enlightenment, so that in future, over time, we'll get smarter and smarter about what we do. So my plea really is for the two schools to separate, to talk better to each other, but to recognise their differences. What do I mean? I mean, if you like, the political school, which is saying this is what aid should be doing, investing in the vulnerable. We just need to get going. And we need to, if you like, we can use the word resilience, we can use any other word we want, because it's not about a word, it's not about an analytical term, it's about what we do, and we know how to monitor progress, and we know how to learn. We haven't done it well enough, and I am arguing that all of these debates around quantification of this esoteric term resilience are actually letting us all off the hook, and it's about time that we were put firmly on the hook and held to account for our lack of attention to impact monitoring. Meanwhile, if you like, the technical experts, yes, they need to be doing lots and lots of work over time. They've got to stop defining resilience for the practitioners, and they've got to do an awful lot more about enlightening us in different situations, what helps it and what doesn't. And with that, I'll conclude. Good night.